Okay, guys. Now this video is going to be about structure charts. It's part of a program design, so you would typically do this before you actually start writing code. I know most of us just jump straight into coding and figure it out as it goes, but actually structure charts are very useful, especially if you're an outsider to the project. They might help you navigate through it or understand what makes up your program. Now, structure charts essentially show all the modules that are part of your project. In other words, they show how values are passed between your procedures or your functions. And if we read through this piece of text here, it says a structure chart is a chart which shows the breakdown of a system to its lowest manageable parts. And it says here that they are used in structured programming to arrange program modules into a tree. Each module, procedure, or a function, again, remember modules are referring to either procedures or functions, is represented by a box which contains the module's name. And here are certain points that you might have to mention if they ask you, why would you use a structure chart, or what would the structure chart show? Now, the first thing that is pretty obvious if we look at the diagram below is that we can see that this structure chart is composed of 4 modules. Okay, one called calculate average, one called input nums, one called average, and one called output average. Okay, now it also shows, if you can see these little arrows, okay, these with the hollow circle, these show parameters being passed into a module. So we can see here that calculate average receives 2 parameters. Okay. Also, we can see the sequence of the module execution. This means the order in which it happens. We know that the first thing that will be executed is usually the one on the top. Now, this is also mentioned in the question, so you won't have to guess anything. It can also show iteration or selection, which in this diagram isn't visible. I can show you one that has selection. Selection is represented with a rhombus shape like this. Or iteration, which is essentially a loop, is shown with this symbol here. Okay, so structure charts are actually quite easy. They're very intimidating. When you look at one of these questions, you might feel intimidated to how to actually answer questions regarding these. And the questions revolving around structure charts are usually practical questions. Before we get into that, we might as well learn a few things about it. So for example, here, it tells us, it labels everything on this diagram above. So it says here, each square is a module name. It's the name of either a function or a procedure. And it says that the module name is actually called a process because each module does something. It processes some information that's going to be passed into it. Another one here is called a data couple, which in reality is a parameter value. Okay, and essentially it's a value that's either being passed into another module, or it is a value that is being returned. Okay, and last but not least, and this is a very important one to remember, this one that isn't a hollow circle with an arrow is a Boolean value. Now, this will come into play later on when I show you certain examples of past paper questions and what's expected of you. Okay, so here's an exam question. This is actually taken from, I think, June 2022. Okay, and it gives us this big question. It's like a whole page just for this structure chart. Okay, and I can tell you for a fact, most of you will see this and you'll feel a bit intimidated. Oh my God, this is very difficult. But in fact, it's actually very easy. Right. Now, in order to solve questions like this, we need to remember a few things. Okay. One of the things that we need to remember, which is a dead giveaway in certain situations, is the Boolean flag. A Boolean is represented by a circle that isn't hollow. Okay. Now, also remember that we need to read through this and see exactly how it begins and where it concludes. What we're meant to do is essentially label these modules. Okay. Now, the question in reality doesn't ask you to label on the chart. On the following page, it tells you essentially write them in a table. They'll provide a table for you. But before we get into that, let's read through the question and see what it says. So it says here the module headers for 5 modules in a program are defined in the pseudocode as follows. So they give us these 5 headers, which are essentially these modules here. Okay, but here there's 6 modules, so that's a bit weird. So let's take a look at what it says after. It says an additional module head repeatedly calls 3 of the modules in sequence. A structure chart has partially been completed. So the first thing that we figure out is this sentence here says an additional module called head repeatedly calls 3 of the modules in sequence. The only one that calls 3 modules in sequence is A. So we know our starting point. We know that A is the head. Okay? Now, it says here, complete the structure chart to include information given about the 6 modules. Do not label the parameters and do not write module names. Okay, so the only reason it's mentioning this is because on the actual past paper examination, in the next page, there's a section for you to write that B is this one, C is that one, etc., etc., etc. Okay, now, let's take a look at this really quickly. And I can tell you for a fact immediately that this should tell us one of the answers straight away. We know that this arrow here is a Boolean value. Okay? Now, how are we going to identify this? Well, A receives a Boolean value from D. Let's find which one mentions anything about a Boolean value. And lo and behold, the first one, which is called function mod v2, returns a Boolean value. So immediately, we've figured out what D is. So I'm going to insert a couple of text boxes here and there so that we can label them. So D is equal to mod underscore v function. Okay, so we know that D is this one. Okay, perfect. Now, we can look at the shape and we can see, okay, some of these send more than one value, some of them send one value, and so forth and so forth. So let's try and isolate some of these. Okay, there's another function, which means that we have another module returning a value, meaning that the arrow should be pointing upwards. Well, we've already seen this one. Okay, so we can't say that D is this one here. Okay, but if we keep on looking, the only other module, okay, that returns a value that has an arrow pointing upwards is E. So I'm going to copy this. Whoops. Copy it, paste it, and we're going to say that E, in this case, is mod Z. Okay, there we go. Easy. Right. Now let's keep on going. We've figured out this one. We figured out that one. We figured out essentially all the functions. Now let's take a look at the procedures. This one says that mod W receives one parameter. Essentially, we're looking for a box that has only one arrow pointing towards it. If we take a close look at our structure chart, the only one that has an arrow pointed towards it is B. Okay, so let's copy that one. Whoops, paste it and put it here. So B would be mod W, like so. Okay. Now, let's take a look at the remaining two. Now, between the remaining two, they're both procedures. They both receive 2 parameters, okay? But one of them is receiving a parameter by ref, if you can see here. That means that we're looking for an arrow that's double-sided, essentially. The only one that has two parameters being passed in and a double-sided arrow is C. So we've immediately, figured out this one. So that would be C, and it's called mod X. Okay, and we're not going to do any more digging around. We're going to copy this and paste it here, and we're going to say that the last one, obviously, because it's the only one that's left, is mod Y. Here we go, mod Y, and the letter for this one was F. Okay, well, there you have it. That was me solving a typical structured chart question in a matter of a few minutes. There's a few things that you have to remember while you're solving these. So remember, arrows pointing upwards means essentially returning values. So they're usually things like this one here or this one here are usually referring to functions. Now, we had two functions. How did we determine which of the two is which of these modules? Well, that's quite easy because they gave us a Boolean value here. So we knew immediately that this function would be this module right here. Whereas the other one, they didn't mention if it was a Boolean value. They said it was an integer value, but it was the only other function in the structure chart that actually had an arrow pointing upwards, meaning returning a value. Now, in the remaining, what we did was we took them one by one and we looked at, for example, this one, and we were looking for a procedure or a module that receives only one parameter, meaning that we're looking for only one arrow pointing towards one module. And the only one in this situation was this one right here. Now, the last thing that we realized was if we have something called byref, which is a method of retrieving essentially parameters or values, the arrow that they use is a double-sided one, as you can see very clearly here. Okay. Now, there's one thing that we skipped, or one thing that might be asked of us, I think we skipped it, is this part here that says complete the structure chart to include information given about the 6 modules. There's one piece of information that we did not draw. We did not show the iteration. So we did not draw. Let me see if I can find the shape. Let's see, shape. We need something like this, much more flat. Okay. We needed to draw like a semicircle here to show that this is a loop, because it says here it's repeatedly called. Okay, hope this one was interesting and helpful for you guys. I'll catch you in the next one.